Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Hallie Tecco, and today I'm talking with Zack Ziegler, the co-founder and CTO of OpenEvidence. OpenEvidence is an AI co-pilot for doctors that helps them make high-stakes decisions at the point of care. Its mission is to organize and expand the world's collective medical knowledge. Aside from the iPhone, there has never been a piece of technology adopted by doctors as quickly as OpenEvidence. Zack, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you just tell us about the founding of the company? It's a relatively new company. I guess when it comes to AI companies, it's ancient, but when it comes to startups, it's still quite young. So tell us about the founding story and the premise of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is technical. I come from a PhD program at Harvard, working with Sasha Rush on the mathematical underpinnings of the class of models that we all now call large language models, and at the time we called probabilistic generative models. And so this comes from the world pre-ChatGPT, kind of the whole world knowing about this little mini known field known as natural language processing. And when I was in my PhD working on these models, these were like, it's very weird to think about now, but these were literally toy systems. They were these free generating models that were used as kind of like theoretical systems to explore properties of complex distribution modeling. The kind of only application in NLP that anyone could imagine was translation. So when I would go to parties or meet people, I would tell people that I worked on translation because that was only like in way that people interacted with language. Yeah, exactly. And specifically generating language, having there be a sequence of tokens that come into the world.
Okay. What year was this when that was like the only thing on our minds?
So this was 2017, 2018.
Okay.
And that was kind of when I started my PhD. So I had a successful first few years of this academic experience, and I started to get really into the question of how do we make these models actually do something, right? This is the world, if you guys remember, of like GANs, of kind of small, blurry, but still kind of cool images that were being generated, like little strings of text that were being generated. And it was like, these things are really cool. Like these things do incredibly amazing, interesting, cool things. But like, what does that do for the world? Like, how do we actually make that do something real? How do we actually apply that to the real world and have that turn into something that can be a business, but also something that really impacts people's lives? So I really started to get obsessed with this idea, and I really wanted to find ways to make these things useful, to actually do useful stuff. And around similar times, I got connected with Daniel, and he and I both had Daniel was also very interested in kind of the generative modeling space. And around that time, we both had our kind of like first experiences with the like meaningful experience of the healthcare system. My brother-in-law was diagnosed with leukemia. And he's okay now. He's in remission. But it was really my first experience. Every experience I'd had with a healthcare system. So I was blown away by the fact that apparently now for leukemia, we've indexed like all of the very, very slightly different mutations that can lead to different leukemias, for example. And you do wildly different things in all of these different cases to optimize treatment and to optimize care. And so that was kind of one of my personal unlocks. That was here we are looking at these tools around kind of cool generative modeling, what we do with this. And on the other hand, here's this application that requires an immense amount of knowledge. It requires more knowledge than any one human can ever hope to kind of stuff into their minds. In any case, we were lucky to be in Boston at some of the best hospitals in the world, hem-onc doctors in the world supporting us. But in many places of the country where you don't have that, there's just no way that we could have had the treatment that we had in that specific case. And so that was one piece, but really started to get me personally thinking about, how do we use these models for solving this really important problem of helping physicians get access to the right information and really improving what is fundamentally an extremely hard job by kind of closing the gap between this immense amount of knowledge that we actually know as a species and is written down somewhere with the practitioners that every day really need this knowledge.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were first noodling on the idea and starting to pitch investors, you actually originally thought about going direct to consumer and doing a better WebMD. Is that right?
So, my very first kind of core thesis that I got excited about was looking at kind of the WebMDs of the world and asking the question, why can't I just know something like, does a ketogenic diet work? Right? It turns out there is a ton of literature. There's probably thousands of papers that are published about this, clinical trials, like real data about this. And yet at the same time, the state of the internet is that it's filled with, largely garbage, right? People making influencer posts, extremely low
Selling
quality,
you stuff. Yeah. Seed
highly out of
oils.
date thing. So for me as a consumer, that's what I look at. I'm like, there should be a better way than this. There should be a
Yeah.
way to ask, what does the real science actually say? So that was an original North Star for me. But as we got into this, it became clear that physicians really are the right consumer for this sort of application. That, to the extent that we have these problems as consumers, this problem is actually, 10 or 100 times more acute for providers. And so that and a few other reasons are why we very quickly focused on providers. And that's really been our focus ever
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do want to get into that, the business model, but maybe first you can kind of give us some numbers that kind of illustrate the scale that you're at, because you guys have grown so quickly in the few years that you've been around.
Yeah. So since the kind of founding days of asking, what do we do with these language models and can we apply them to healthcare? We've grown to the point where we have over 40% of U.S. clinicians on the platform, spanning over 10,000 care centers. We just passed 17 million questions per month from
Wow.
U.S. practicing clinicians, and it's been absolutely incredible. To make a very long story short, we've taken an approach that is bottom up as opposed to tops down. We've always, I'm a builder. I love just building stuff. And I've always had a focus on like, let me just make something really useful, right? That was how we always started. We really just put OpenEvidence out into the world. And I think it really hit a nerve among clinicians meeting an extremely real need for extremely challenging job. We've seen, an enormous amount of organic growth that we're extremely excited about and just proud to be able to make something that people like and that is useful. And yeah, and now we're at
And
40% engagement.
you've raised over 300 million, but I hear that you are keeping the company small in terms of headcount and culture. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we're people are surprised when we tell them this. They assume that we're some enormous company. We're about 25 engineers at this point. That's a whole separate track about company building and that sort of thing. But the reality is, building a company is hard, and it requires an extremely high density of really special individuals. And so we've from a team building perspective, we've focused on building one of the most elite applied AI teams on the planet. I truly believe that the density of applied AI talent we have, I think, is maybe the highest anywhere on the planet. And we've focused on building a group that is really passionate about building really great tools for physicians. And that's what we wake up every day thinking about.
Yeah. I know that some of the tech giants like Meta are throwing tons of money around to recruit the same sort of folks that you are recruiting. Do you sell the engineers on the mission? Is that kind of how you guys differentiate from other companies that are trying to acquire this talent?
Yeah. So of course the mission is an inextricable part of what we do. At this point, I'll say it's very easy, right? There really has never been in healthcare, there's never been a kind of such a direct to consumer product that has grown so quickly, especially in this kind of new world of AI where everything is incredibly exciting and there's so much opportunity to make a difference as an individual, to contribute and to make really fantastic things. I think that our culture of being extremely lean, of getting away from management and middle management and bureaucracy and that sort of stuff, and having really a true focus on autonomy and accountability um, and excellence it's a place people really want to work, and it's a mission that is clearly so important. And I think one of the most exciting things, just anecdotally, right, is we go to conferences and it is so fantastic when we talk to physicians at conferences or anywhere where we meet them, and they're like, "Oh my God." I've had this experience that's happened a few times where I'll be at some completely unrelated event. I'll meet someone, I'll tell them that I'm the co-founder of OpenEvidence, and their eyes will kind of go wide and be like, "Oh my God, I'm a doctor." They'll pull out their phone and like they'll like show me the app. They're like, "Look, I have this downloaded. I love this." And that's a really, really fun experience to be able to be making that kind of a difference
Yeah.
for so many people. And I think some of the most
You're like
ambitious
a rock
people
star to the rock
want to do that.
stars. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, of all people that you're serving, right? Physicians, clinicians are some of the
Yeah.
most discriminative, thoughtful, detail-oriented group, and
Those
it's
are
really great
nice.
to hear
Those are
so much.
nice ways to put it. Tell me about why you decided to go directly to clinicians versus how every other piece of medical software goes, which is through the employers selling to the hospital systems. Like, why did you decide that route, and how are you actually reaching them?
When we set out to leverage large language models for the kind of medical application, and to make tools for physicians, we started by kind of just doing what Daniel always does, what I always do, which is just move fast, iterate super quickly, and just put something out into the world. Right? The very first version of OpenEvidence we put into the world looks very different than the version that we put out now. So we took this approach that was like, let's just kind of vaguely sort of do this thing that meets this North Star that we should be able to ask in 2025. What does the science say about this? What are the actual facts about this thing? Let's just put it into the world for physicians, and let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's just like get their feedback. And so we iterated quickly.
So basically,
Yeah.
you just didn't want to have to go sell to hospitals. You wanted
Well,
to just be able to build, have your user try it, and iterate.
I'll tell you one more step more precise than that, which is as we put this out into the world, we started to get just the most incredible feedback from doctors specifically, right? Which was, thank you for making this. This is an absolute game changer. I mean, it was incredible. Even as we had 100 users, 1,000 users, 10,000
Yeah.
users, we got really fantastic personal heartfelt feedback. Someone told us this is the best thing since penicillin for doctors, right? Like that's definitely hyperbole, but when you hear that stuff, it's hard not to be motivated to
Yeah.
be like, this is incredible. Like
Yeah.
whatever this is, I just want to do more of this. And so
And who
as
were
this,
they? And who were they? Did you start with like friends and family that were physicians, or did you like go to the hospital and like say, hey, let me download this app for you?
so what we did very early on is we made static content. So we would write our own questions and generate answers. And then we would do an extremely small amount of marketing. So we would just put that on Twitter, for example, and be like, here's just some medical information, medical content. And people looked at that and they were like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like even just as static written content, there's nothing like this, right? Like, this is actual real cited facts. It cites the top journals as of, a week ago, as of yesterday in some cases. And so that was kind of our jumping off point. But for us, really, like when we started to get this feedback, like the truth is like we just optimized for leaning into more and more and more of pulling the thread of whatever is driving that feedback, right? And it wasn't CMIOs emailing us telling us, oh, this is great, I really want this. It was the physician in rural Virginia that doesn't traditionally have access to anything, that is, even in this AI world without a company that's like us going direct to clinicians, they're not going to see the benefit of AI tools for probably like 100 years or something at the rate that all of this goes, right? There's 300 large health systems. There's something like 30,000 small and medium-sized hospitals. There's like 300,000 practices if you include small solo practitioners across the United States. Traditionally, these tools and technology don't percolate their way into individuals.
Yeah.
Our feedback was so positive, so heartwarming, so motivating. We kind of just never stopped that. And we're like, well, let's just keep doing more and more of that. And we were able to find a way to make that into a viable business.
So the product is free for clinicians, but as the saying goes, if the product is free, you're the product. I think I know, but can you tell us about how you're currently, or how you plan to in the future, monetize the product?
Yeah, absolutely. So the business model is the oldest business model in the world, which is advertising. And
Is
so what
that
that means,
that's the oldest business model in the world?
oldest business model in the world, maybe the second oldest business model in the world, but it's up there. And the way this works is when you ask a question, because we have to go and do a whole bunch of extremely deep thinking, research, and reasoning processes, there's a natural period where the model is thinking. We're not slowing it down. It actually just has to go do a bunch of really hard thinking and retrieval tasks, right? We're searching over 40 million publications. We're searching over 10 to 20,000 societies. There's 10,000 newer updated papers publish every single day. So there's this natural process where we got to go do a bunch of that research. And so we'll share display ads during that kind of interstitial loading period. The ad goes away and the page loads. And that's it, quite simply.
And I can
That's
guess
the core
pharma
model.
ads, those are probably the
Yeah, it's
folks
usually
most
pharma ads.
interested. You said it's looking over millions of peer review publications. What was that exact number again?
So there's about 40 million
40 million.
peer-reviewed publications about biomedical science
Okay.
um, that have been published. We add on to that data from the FDA. So every FDA label that's up to date to the day. All of the peer-reviewed medical literature is up to date to
Yeah.
the day. We work with societies, an extremely long tail of societies that work tirelessly as volunteers and nonprofits to produce some of the highest quality but dense and hard to kind of find information about every medical specialty. So we include a lot of that as well. And then for us, the biggest kind of technical challenge really becomes, how do we mimic the behavior of a doctor when they look at this enormous set of information, right? Because if you're a doctor and you're trying to find information, right? We said there's 40 million papers that have been published. Not every one of those is equal, of course. And anyone you talk to in the field will tell you there is an enormous amount of garbage included in that 40 million, right? And
And a lot of it is not reproducible.
a lot of it's not reproducible. A lot of it isn't, like, parts of it aren't even peer reviewed, right? Parts of it are like pay to play type situations. It includes an enormous amount of stuff, and that's both an opportunity and a risk, right? It's an opportunity because there's very clear aspects of the literature to where everything can be trusted, right? The NEJMs of the world, the JAMAs of the world. You go down the list. There's a fantastic amount of extremely high quality literature, and we emphasize drawing from the best journals. But there's also an incredibly long tail, and included in that tail is where you have to start to be careful, right? Because there's stuff, like you say, that's really hard to reproduce, or that just simply can't be reproduced. And there's also just gems, right? Sentences here or there, paragraphs that are enormously helpful and can really inform care in a meaningful way. And it's especially those types of journals that we spend a lot of time making sure that we balance and we go through. And so, we essentially try to mimic the decision-making behavior of doctors, of clinical practice, when doctors are looking at these journals. So, if there's a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine 10 years ago about a phase 3 trial for a drug, how do we weigh that against maybe a meta review published 2 years ago about a same drug or a similar drug, or same drug in the category in, one tier down journal? How do we weigh that against something published yesterday in maybe an ASCO abstract, for example, or something like that? And the reality is that all of these different parts of the literature, the FDA, CDC guidelines, they all serve important parts of healthcare, of informing clinician practice in reality. And so it's our job to put those together and display that information appropriately to a user, so they're getting kind of exactly the right information at exactly the right time.
And you're obviously getting, qualitative feedback from talking to your customers, but are you getting any sort of like ongoing feedback as the clinicians are using the app that can tell you the length of answer that is preferred, how to prioritize different pieces of literature, et cetera?
Yeah, so we have the honest truth is that by far the best feedback is qualitative. There's something about it's everybody wants to be data driven, and that's true,
Yeah.
and I'll talk about that in a sec. But actually, the reality is, like, the most helpful stuff is just talking face to face with someone, and being the user yourself in some cases, right? And asking, what is important to you? How would you do this? Do you like A or B better, right? Those are actually, and then being able to take those conversations and extrapolate properly into the right generalizable takeaways from that actually is kind of the real most important way. We have, especially early on, we have kind of standard mechanisms on the platform as well. So we have ways for people to indicate, I loved this. We have ways to indicate, this was great, but, like, here's an addition that I would add to this. We have at an individual publication level, we have, hey, this was a really good source for that. This is a really bad source. Early on, that was a fantastic data set. We hooked it up to a Slack channel in our Slack. And, every time some feedback would come in, we'd be like, oh, fantastic, here's some feedback.
Now there's
Let's
too
all look at
much,
this
I'm sure.
carefully. Now it's like literally like once, it's just this like absolute fire hose of stuff. So we sample
Yeah.
from that, and it's enormously
Yeah.
useful. But yeah, we can't really read every single one
Yeah.
anymore.
How did you build trust, especially early on? I feel like, and I know, like, there are clinicians that would use ChatGPT, which is crazy to think about. But how did you build that trust to get someone to even use the app to begin with? And, like,
Yeah.
put in information that's like, work information and sometimes patient information.
Yeah. So the reality is that the core piece of trust for us comes from references. You don't have to trust anything about what is actually written by AI, the generative answer, because everything is always grounded by the references. So you always have a place to go and trace through to get answers. And so very early on, you didn't have to take, like, a leap of faith to use this, and it's still true. There's no leap of faith required, right? We spend all of our energy and all of our effort asking, if you're going to have a complex medical question, how do we find exactly the right references and the right sources to draw from? We actually take an approach that is actually exactly opposite to the kind of ChatGPT top-down big black box of AI LLM type approach, right? That approach, which is kind of become the standard for ChatGPT and for others, is I have this enormous, trillion parameter language model. You're gonna ask your question. There's gonna be some big black box. You're gonna get an answer. I'm not gonna tell you where the answer came from. I'm not gonna tell you anything. Maybe it'll be right. Maybe it'll be wrong. Good luck, right?
But I'll
We
be
take
super confident about that answer. I'll make
That's
you
right,
think
and it'll
I'm
be
right.
how confident they should be about the answer. Our approach is bottom up. We start from the belief that humans are really good. Humans have actually written down a lot of really, really good things. And it's true, right? Especially in healthcare, we're extremely fortunate that there's an enormous amount of really fantastic information that is written down about the literature about how to practice healthcare. And so we understand the problem of, hey, I have a question, not of put this into my big black box and just guess, right? We understand this question as, let me find the exact 4 right sentences that spans these millions and millions of documents, right? Let me find the relevant phase 3 clinical trial if there's a relevant clinical trial. Let me find what the relevant society guidelines say about this. Let me find what the latest FDA label update says. Let me find what the latest meta review says about these. And if we can find exactly the right sentences where your question truly is answered, and we can put them all together in one place, we can produce an answer on the basis of that A is almost impossible to hallucinate because it's drawn from real sources and because it's grounded in what the humans are actually saying, right? The task of summarize these things into a coherent answer is a much easier task than let me just guess and try to produce something. So it has the effect of just being more accurate, and people are actually very sensitive to that. But it also has the effect of having a transparency to it, right? That we can always show, not just at a collective level, but even at the individual sentence level for what we say, here's the citation that you go and look through. And so it actually doesn't require any trust in some ways. Our tagline recently has become trust but verify. Trust any AI or even to engage with AI at all. At the end of the day, if you want to use OpenEvidence purely as a search engine, it's enormously valuable purely as a search engine.
Yeah. Okay, so my big question is, why only allow clinicians to use it? Like, the sign up requires a verification that you're a clinician. Why not
Yeah.
let a patient use it?
So the biggest reason right now at this moment is we don't want to make physician lives harder. If you talk to clinicians, one of the things that almost everyone will get this kind of look on their face and have a bit of an exacerbated sigh before they reply about dealing with patients who come in who have kind of done their own research is this phenomenon called Dr. Google, right? And it's a really tricky balancing act because on the one hand, doctors obviously want everyone to have access to all of the best information and highest quality information. On the other hand, right, a physician sees about 3,000 patients a year, 2 to 3,000 patients a year if they're an average practicing physician. They're going to have 20, maybe 15, maybe 20 minutes for a patient visit. And one of the most frustrating things if you talk to clinicians is they'll come in and you'll spend the first 15 minutes of a patient visit as a doctor kind of trying to walk back the patient from all of this kind of research that they did and information that they came with just to get to a point where you have 5 minutes now to kind of start making progress on your own. And it's a tricky balancing act because we can provide consumers really fantastic information, right? My family and friends all use OpenEvidence. I use OpenEvidence myself for my own stuff, but we're really hyper focused on the physician experience. And so we really want to be able to focus on making a tool that is hyper focused
Mm.
on, let me exactly solve the problem for physicians. Let's make exactly the right tool for physicians and really kind of corner ourselves off to focus on that problem.
From a business standpoint, I understand needing to focus, and opening it up to individuals definitely creates new problems. But I do want to double click on that for a second because I recently saw a doctor on LinkedIn complaining about what he referred to as an AI tax, which is exactly what you said. This idea that patients who are using AI to do their own homework will take up more of a doctor's time. And I actually looked into it to see if there was any evidence of that. And there's zero empirical evidence. Actually, I should ask OpenEvidence if they can find anything. But I could not find any peer reviewed studies quantifying a AI time tax or even a Google time tax. But I could find some early research that pre-visit like prep tools and patients who are prepared and empowered actually show better outcomes and higher satisfaction, not the opposite. So I actually think that a lot of clinicians that have this annoyance, which I think is a small percentage of clinicians. I think the best clinicians actually really appreciate patients that spend time understanding their condition and their options. But I think that this capacity problem really predates AI, and it's just the result of decades of productivity pressures on clinicians and having this very small amount of time that if you can't in that small amount of time accommodate informed patients, that's actually a problem of the system, not an AI problem. So something that I'm, really excited about is, well, let's change minds of those clinicians that think that this could be a bad thing. But what I would love to see is a consumer tool that doesn't hallucinate like ChatGPT, that is more reliable, that patients could use to better prepare and manage. So I think you're in a very good position to go to consumer. And I think if you don't do it, someone else is going.
Yeah. No, I think you make a lot of really good points, and certainly, like, for myself, right, like, I do
Yeah.
get an enormous amount of value, right? Like, and I see that, right? There's real value in it's the things you said, right? It's pre pre-visit prep, it's more informed patients, it's that sort of stuff. We're in a
Yeah.
position right now where, we need to I think the technology is there. I think that we can add value to this thing. We're making a choice at the moment to stay hyper focused on the clinician case. Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time.
The fact that medical literature is in its own language is a barrier
Yeah,
to true patient engagement and empowerment. And it means that clinicians really, there's a asymmetry of information, not because patients couldn't understand it, but because it's in a language that only clinicians speak. So huge opportunity there. And when I think about AI in healthcare, I visualize this 2x2, where on the axis it goes from administrative billing to clinical work, or like the back office to bedside. And on the y-axis, really going from the co-pilot assistive layer to the agent, acting autonomously. And so obviously you guys are in the quadrant of clinical co-pilot, but do you think there's a future where your models could actually work in agent mode?
yeah. Well, I'll say this: our North Star for everything that we do, and I think everything we'll ever do, is clinicians are in the driver's seat. Clinicians are the human in the mech armor that is supported by tools that make them more productive, that allow them to leverage their intelligence, their training, their expertise, their intuition, all their uniquely human pieces to be as powerful, as useful, and as productive as possible. But that being said, what I'm really excited about going forward is giving physicians more and more and more powerful tools at their disposal. So, for example, one of the features we added to OpenEvidence 2 or 3 months ago now is Deep Consult, and this is an agentic system that you can think of as basically the equivalent of a doctor having a team of expert MD PhDs in their pocket, where not like without asking, but like with the instruction of, hey, could you go find, and do this research report for me? It's the equivalent of having that team that you can say, hey, go do this research report for me. They'll go, if they were real humans, they'd go out for like a month and come back with some written report citing, 100 references, having done a extremely deep dive, multiple layers of retrieval and thinking and iterating, and smart agentic processes and all that stuff. And they'll come back with you with Console. Is that for free for every doctor in a way that comes back within 5 to 10 minutes max, with that same kind of written report. That's how I see, there is this natural progression to more agentic, to more thinking, to all these sort of things. For us, those are layers that we absolutely have added into OpenEvidence over time, actually exist today,
Sure.
and we build more and more layers on. But
Yeah.
it's never instead of the physician. It's always keeping the physician in the driver's seat.
It's interesting because you almost would think that there's an opportunity similarly to enable clinicians to do more specialist work. So, for example, a OBGYN that has a patient who is facing infertility and is on a 6-month wait list to see a fertility doctor. Could they use a tool like OpenEvidence to kind of take those first steps of, taking the right tests, maybe some medications that they wouldn't have done otherwise?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. The framework that we've discussed this in with a clinicians is kind of the e-consult framework. So the way that this works currently, and this is, I think, as of maybe 10 or 15 years ago, this notion of e-consult has started to come up, where there are programs that let people, mostly generalists, PCPs, family doctors, emergency medicine, if they have a case that probably would be best, addressed or consulted by a specialist. There's programs that are like, let me kind of like summarize this case, what I'm thinking, put all the patient data, all the lab values, and let me just send it off to a specialist. The reality is that that might come back. The average time for those e-consults to come back is something like 2 months. The biggest problem is there's a lack of aligned incentives. Our crazy insurance structure in this country poses problems to that sort of thing. And so there is a very real need for generalists who are seeing people where they know that there is, some deep specialized knowledge to be required for this. And this is a framework in which I think OpenEvidence has been replacing a lot of those econ, where OpenEvidence can be a tool for generalists, for family doctors, for PCPs, where they can kind of skip around that like 2 month wait time to find a specialist to go talk to a specialist and get kind of either a specialist equivalent answer or at least the specialist perspective on their case. We see a lot of people actually using Deep Consult for that. And we're kind of early days in some academic research about how that works and really in practice kind of quantifying what that looks like for physicians.
Awesome. Okay, last question. Besides OpenEvidence, what is the application of AI that you are second most excited about?
Well, I still see myself as a software engineer, right? I still write code every single day. I love building stuff. So it's hard not to think about kind of these coding agents. Obviously, it's not a secret that there's a ton of kind of software engineering coding agents, tools that work really well. For me, I think there's public discourse around that kind of mirrors a lot of discourse around physicians' use of AI, and I think a lot of public use of AI for all sorts of verticals. I think there's a lot of fear, and a lot of like concern. There's questions of like, are people going to lose their jobs for these things? There's concerns of like, are we just like making ourselves stupid? What I see, and the thing that I truly know best in the entire world, which is software engineering, is these tools are really incredible. They're not taking anyone's job. We're not hiring less because of it. They are productivity enhancers. They make me, I know as a software engineer, these tools make me enormously more productive. And I'm incredibly bullish on apply to AI across the board, partially because of that, partially because of what we see in open evidence. And I think all of these tools really are extremely net positive. And I think as people start to adopt them specifically for being tools, like I think when people realize that this isn't some scary like Terminator style thing, these are literally just like mech suits of productivity enhancement. Like, they'll realize one day like, oh, I can actually just use this. It can just like make my job so much easier. I'm just going to do that. And I think that's really
Yeah.
at the core of why we see so much adoption of open evidence. That's why these coding agents have been adopted at such a high level. And I think we're going to see this across every industry, really. I actually don't think we've even seen, even 20% of the rest of the iceberg of how especially applied tools are really going to become the standard and the norm in almost every industry.
Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you so much for your time today. I loved our conversation.
Thank you. Likewise.